Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Morgan, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion. I am the chair of the Intergovernmental Committee for Economic and Labor Force Development, which we call ICE for short, for obvious reasons, and we're hosting today's event. In a nutshell, what ICE does is facilitate collaboration among all three orders of government around economic and labor force development in Toronto. Our goal is to break down the silos and facilitate information sharing and collaboration across government. So our members include representatives from about a dozen different offices at the City of Toronto, Province of Ontario, and federal government. Our activities are made possible by the financial support of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada and the City of Toronto Economic Development and Culture Division. And our activities include identifying topics of collective interest around which we commission nonpartisan third-party research and host forums such as today's event. Even though we're speaking virtually today, I want to acknowledge that I am speaking from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 15 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Just before we get into the program, there is some technical information that I want to provide in case anyone's having any issues. If your internet quality is poor, there is a click here to refresh stream that's just below the video player. And if you can then view the webinar at a lower bandwidth, the video quality will decrease, but the audio should remain the same. If you're having any other technical issues, click on the help button in the bottom right corner of the webcast page, and an answer to your help request will be emailed back to you at the email address you provided when you registered. You'll also see a couple of tabs and buttons on the event page. One is the speakers tab, where the names and titles of our presenters are listed. We'll be introducing them in a few minutes, and their full bios are posted on the ICE Committee website, which is icecommittee.org. We'll also be posting the presentation slides from today and a link to the webcast recording on that site after today's event. I'll be emailing everyone who's registered to provide you with the website links and how you can get in touch with us in the future, and I'll be doing that probably Monday of next week. The questions tab is where you can submit any questions you'd like to ask the speakers and panelists. Questions will be considered after the presentation and the panel discussion, but please send them in as they occur to you during the webcast. You can do that by clicking the question tab, typing in your question, and then clicking submit. If you'd like to ask your question to a specific person, please include that information as well. And we are asking you to please take a moment to provide your feedback on the session. Click on the participant survey button and let us know what you think and your suggestions for the future. And I promise you it's just a very few questions and won't take you more than 30 seconds to a minute to complete. It was very helpful for us in planning future events. You can fill out the survey before you sign out of the webinar or afterwards if that's more convenient for you. So the program for today's event was planned by Jagdish Yadav, who is a sector development specialist in Toronto's Economic Development and Culture Division and is one of the ICE committee members. About 100 of you have registered today. You represent a broad cross-section of the workforce development and green economy ecosystems and policymakers. And we thank you very much for your interest and hope that you find this afternoon's discussion useful and interesting. So I'm now going to turn the screen over to Jagdish for him to introduce the program.
Thank you, Judy. Many of us, probably many of you, probably are aware that the City of Toronto has adopted a TransformTO net zero strategy. This strategy lays out low carbon goals and strategies to reduce the local greenhouse gas emissions. The targets are ambitious and time bound. So in this strategy, there are a lot of actions and a lot of targets. But how to meet those targets within this given time period is it's challenging, at least to me. Globally, there is shift towards climate action plans. The City of Toronto's this net zero strategy, as it evolves to 2040 or 2050, it's important to understand the products and services that will go into this strategic action plan. We need to understand the changing nature of the labor market and variety of the new skills and aptitudes needed for the net zero strategy. In the coming years, it will be important to ensure that the economy keeps pace with the needs of the labor market and the variety of skills that will be in demand. Now, we think the net zero strategy presents an enormous economic opportunity for Toronto and for the region. For example, opportunities in the manufacturing sectors. But we are not talking about manufacturing sector here. But there are enormous opportunity available to support the creation of good, well-paying jobs and careers in every region of GTA or country itself. For example, we don't have an estimate of the jobs that will be created because of net zero strategy, but to give an idea of the opportunity that is available with some right plans and plans, the road to 2050 net zero emissions economy globally will secure about $2.4 trillion in investment. And according to international energy agencies, the net zero emissions by 2050 scenario could create almost 40 million new jobs in clean energy itself by 2030. Now, that means in Canada, the growth of clean energy jobs will be about 3.5% annually for the next decade. Now, when we talk about the jobs, new jobs or current jobs, these jobs will require the skills the workers will need in order to implement the activities mentioned in the net zero strategy. For example, some of these skills are available now, and some of these workers will continue to work, but in larger numbers. Some skills will be there, which will be new, and we have to focus on that. Now, some of the important considerations for this new strategy are that how to use the skills available in the existing workforce and how to develop the new skills. There will be collaboration among different stakeholders because the work plan is, or the labor work plan is not straightforward. It's pretty complicated. There will be need for collaboration among different stakeholders, whether it's training schools, whether the industry, whether the governments or the non-for-profit sector. Now, there are many issues and we need to understand those issues. And that's why this panel discussion is there. We are hoping that some new ideas will come up through this panel discussion from the experts, which will help us in planning for the workforce development strategy. That's it from me. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Oops. Thank you very much, Jagdish. I really appreciate the opportunity to moderate this event. We have some really good panelists today. What we'll be doing, we'll be having Sophie from the Climate and Climate Division, do a presentation next, and then after that we'll move into the panel. We'll have 4 questions that are being posed to the panelists. Each panelist will have the opportunity to lead off the answering of the question, with the other panelists following. Each are going to be given about a minute to respond to that question, and then we'll have a second round where each panelist can respond to what they've heard from the other panelists for about 30 seconds. After we go through the 4 questions, then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Sophie Plotel to do a presentation on Toronto's net zero strategy. Sophie is a program manager at Environment and Climate Division at the City of Toronto, and she was part of the team that developed TransformTO, the net zero strategy, and now works on implementation, accountability, and reporting related to the strategy. Sophie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rob. Happy to be there this afternoon. So I'll be taking everybody through a brief overview of TransformTO, discuss what those targets are, what those actions are that Jagdish was referring to, talk a little bit about what it is that we need to do to get to our targets, and talk about some of the opportunities that we found in development of the strategy. So for those of you that don't know, TransformTO is the name of Toronto's climate action planning strategy. So in December of 2021, City Council endorsed this strategy, the TransformTO Net Zero strategy, which set a series of ambitious targets to reach net zero by 2040. And you can see there in the chart on the right, what we've done is really design this strategy to address the main sources of our greenhouse gas emissions in Toronto. And again, you can see there on the right, primarily, these are from homes and buildings in green. The next largest sector is transportation and waste. I'll go into a little bit more next about where these emissions come from. So you can see on the left all of the major sources of emissions. So you can see primarily these are from natural gas used in buildings. And I'll guide your attention to the chart on the top right. So within the building sector, we know that our emissions primarily come from the residential sector. And we have over 500,000 residential kind of single family homes in Toronto, meaning that this is a large opportunity for transformation. And natural gas is the primary source of our emissions in Toronto from our heating and cooling and water heating systems. The next major source of our emissions is from gasoline, primarily used in the transportation of vehicles. And in the chart on the bottom right, you can see that within the transportation sector, over 70% come from passenger vehicles. So again, a major opportunity for transformation. The next major source of emissions is from methane, from the breaking down of organics in our waste. And other sectors include other fuels like diesel, biodiesel, and aviation, and our electricity use. And so again, we've really designed our strategy to address these major sources of emissions. So in this chart, you can see where we've come from and where we're aiming to go. In blue, you can see our historical emissions. So in 1990, we were starting at 25 megatons annually emitting, and we've decreased our emissions now. Our latest years of reporting are 2020. And we've had a decrease of 43% since 1990. And that means that we exceeded our 2020 target, but we do have a long way to go. And the TransformTO Net Zero strategy set a series of ambitious targets for the coming years, and you can see them on the chart here. So for 2025, 2030, and finally to reduce our emissions to net zero by 2040. And just kind of filling in the blank there, your eye, to reach these targets, we do need to increase and our aggressive action. So in developing the strategy, we knew that we needed we needed some critical steps. And so I'll go through them quickly here. The first is that we know we need to count our carbon in the same way that we think about our budgets. So the City of Toronto is implementing for the first time next year a carbon budget. And this is to ensure accountability and transparency in the city's operations and in community operations to try to understand where our emissions are coming from and how we can reduce them. We saw on a previous slide that natural gas is the single largest source of emissions in Toronto. So we're working on strategies to reduce the use of natural gas in our homes and buildings. And one mechanism that we're using to do that is establishing building performance targets for existing buildings. We're also increasing low carbon transportation options and increasing the use of local renewable energy and storage. I'm not going to read through all of these targets here. Jagdish referred to the fact that there are many different targets and actions in this strategy, but just to show you the range of targets that we have in our plan, primarily to address those emissions from our building sector, from energy, transportation, and waste. And so as, again, these are referred to as very ambitious. So by 2030, we're looking to achieve these things, which is that all buildings are designed to near zero, that we reduce the emissions from our existing buildings and homes, that we dramatically increase the use of electric vehicles, that most trips, most commutes are by walking, cycling, or by transit, and that we really increase our waste diversion. I first want to talk about dependencies. We know that these things aren't just going to happen on their own, and there's many things that we need to address. We need to make sure first that everybody's included in this. And I think that's going to be a theme of this discussion, is how we can make sure that everybody is involved and that we center those people who've been historically excluded from conversations like this. We know that also that the City of Toronto isn't the only actor at play here. We know that there needs to be activity from all levels of government, from industry, from private sector. We know also that largely this plan that we've put forward is an electrification plan. And so in Ontario, we need to make sure that we work with our partners in other levels of government to make sure that the electricity that we're going to be using more and more will be as close to near zero as possible. Another big one, and again, a focus of today's conversation, is that we know that the labor market isn't yet quite where it needs to be to support this massive transition that we have planned, and that there need to be new skills, a transformation of skills in the industry to make these things happen. We also know that the ways that we've been doing things aren't happening fast enough or at the scale that we need them to happen. Again, thinking about the fact that we have over 500,000 single-family homes that all need to be retrofitted. How can we do this at scale and at the time, in the timelines required? And finally, of course, we need to make sure that the impacts on the material and land are accounted for. So I think many of us have heard that in the transition to electric vehicles, this requires massive investment in creation of batteries and whatnot. So it's not just about transforming our systems, it's also about thinking about how those systems impact at the global scale. What I think, again, is going to be the focus of the conversation today is thinking about the massive opportunities, and Jagdish mentioned this as well. While this strategy, this net zero strategy, is focused on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we know that this is not the single goal, and it's not the only opportunity at play. We know that by reducing these in a way that's thoughtful and that is inclusive, we can achieve all kinds of other co-benefits. So we can improve our natural systems, we can boost the economy, we can improve affordability, and we can have kind of a healthier city. And these are all interconnected. And in all of our actions, we try to think about the interconnectedness of all of these things. Another major opportunity, and one of great interest probably to this group, is the impact on employment and economy. So in developing our strategy, we did a quite technical analysis and modeling to understand what is possible. We also had a level of that is what impacts might this have on the economy and on jobs. And they found that by achieving a net zero by 2040 city, there would be a number of opportunities for employment and economic development. So for example, they found that by pursuing a net zero by 2040 pathway, there's an opportunity for 1.5 million added person years of employment kind of within the next 30 years. This means about 50,000 jobs annually, which is massive. And primarily these are in home retrofits, building retrofits, and infrastructure development. We know also that by doing these actions, we can expect about $145 billion to go into Toronto's economy. And we also know that this will impact workers by creating additional jobs, by shifting employment, thinking about some jobs that may need to be transitioned. This is a big opportunity for the city. I will say, I recognize that I've really gone quickly through these slides. I invite you to visit toronto.ca/TransformTO to access all of these reports, presentations, and to read through them in detail if this is of interest. Thank you very much for your time. I recognize this was probably a lot of information, and I invite you to ask your questions in the chat and to the panelists in the discussion coming up.
Thank you, Sophia, and I'm pleased that you were able to do this in in good time. It gives us more opportunities to talk with the panelists, okay, and kind of explore the questions in a little bit more in depth. So what I'm going to do is I'll give a little bit of a bio for each of the speakers, and then each speaker is going to have about 2 to 3 minutes just to give their overall perspective of the event's issues and where they might see some areas for further discussion, which I'll try to build into when we get into the actual panel. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Daryl Chow. Daryl is the Director of Business Development at GeoSource Energy as the Partnership Development Specialist, and his responsibilities there include sales development, account management, marketing strategy, advocacy, and stakeholder engagement. So he does a lot there. Prior to his current role, Daryl worked in higher education and not-for-profit sectors, where he helped private sector companies develop strategic interactions to deepen their social accountabilities. The next on the panel is James Nolan. He's the Executive Director of Environment and Climate at the City of Toronto. And James oversees the team responsible for developing the environment and climate policies and programs, including TransformTO. Prior to James joining the city in early 2022, he spent 17 years in the Ontario's public service, where he held policy, program management, and executive leadership positions in several Ontario municipalities. Next in the panel is Manjeet Chihita. Okay. She's Vice President, Industry and Employment and Community Relations, Centennial College. She's been working there for 1 year. And prior to her starting at Centennial College, Manjeet was the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the City of Toronto, where she supported innovative collaborations between the city, the public, and private sector organizations. Last but not least on the panel, and I'm going alphabetically to make this fairly fair, is Dr. Tricia Williams. She's the Director of Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center. And she has expertise in the future of work, including digital economies, skill development, employment and labor market, migration, and gender. At FSC, Tricia leads a pan-Canadian research strategy focused on advancing strategic goals. And with that, I'm going to turn this over first of all to Daryl to give his initial thoughts. Daryl, you've got about 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm pretty brutal with the time, so if you go over, I'll let you know.
All good. Thanks very much, Rob. And good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about GeoSource Energy. So, our firm, we're a technology group. We specialize in the design and implementation of geo-exchange systems at scale. So that is, a low carbon solution to heat and cool buildings within urban, suburban, rural, and remote communities. This is something that we've been doing for the better part of 20 years. The only firm dedicated to the invention and innovation in this space. So it's not new technology, but we're fairly specialized. We're pretty good at what we do. We've done some of the largest systems, implemented some of the largest geo-exchange systems in the country. So we're very proud of our track record and the diligence that we approach our craft. So again, that's a little bit about GeoSource. At the end of the day, I think the reason why it's interesting to be on this panel today is really talking about the need. So at its core, we're a technology group, but we are a construction firm. So we drill holes in the ground and then we implement some systems. What that means is that a large portion of our employees, of the teams that we need to build, are on the construction side. And this is something that, in as much as it's not a new technology, it's new to us, it's new to the region. And it requires some really, I would say, high level of collaboration, a lot of thinking about the plan to bring in enough individuals to upskill, learn the skill, and then to implement. So scalability is very, very critical to our industry in general to be successful. And I think that, as GeoExchange gets adopted more and more readily across, new buildings and retrofitting buildings, we're going to see an incredible pressure on the industry writ large to make sure that we have enough know-how to deliver what the promise of the region is for its net zero goals. So with that, I welcome any questions from the audience further on in the session today, and look forward to participating in a very spirited discussion with the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Daryl. I'll turn this over to James next.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rob. And first, I want to thank Jagdish and Judy for inviting me to be on the panel today. Really happy to be here. As Rob said, I'm the executive director of the Environment and Climate Division at the city, and we lead working across city divisions, agencies, corporations, and with a multitude of partners around the city implementation of TransformTO. And you've heard about the plan, so I'll try not to repeat too much, but it is significant. It is ambitious. The timelines are short in a relative sense in terms of what needs to be done, but it is a huge opportunity as well. Our modeling and modeling is modeling, but I think it's probably under represents what the opportunity is in terms of investments in the city to get to net zero of being close to $150 billion. That is a significant investment needed to reach those goals, and that is a significant opportunity. But it's a complex plan, and I think as you would have seen through the presentation from Sophie, it is going to require a lot of alignment of work across sectors, across partners, and really across society to achieve that ambition, and with all government partners as well. So it is a complex challenge, but it is a significant opportunity, and it is an opportunity that is happening around the world as other jurisdictions, other countries, other cities take this same approach and look at these same opportunities. So, it's that competition is also there, and we need to think about that as well as we look to ramp up our work. Others are doing the same, and how we move will support how we achieve our goals, but also how we take advantage of those investments. And I know we're seeing that as it relates to even activities happening in our neighboring country and investments being made through the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're seeing that now in Canada through investments being made through our federal government, but really, again, kind of that recognition of the significant opportunity we have. So really looking forward to digging in today on the skills and the labor market and what we can do to help to put in place the pieces that will support a lot of the specific activities that are really needed to achieve the ambition that I think we all share.
Good. Thank you, James. Next, I'll turn this over to Manjeet.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Rob and Jagdish and Judy. And what a privilege to be on a panel like this. So I'm very excited. So from my perspective, I look at Centennial College. We're a college that provides training for students, but we're also an asset holder. We're an employer. We're within a community in Scarborough as well. So all of those things are very important to us as we look at issues of sustainability and, in terms of looking at net zero, what does that mean to us as an organization? So our interest lies from a student level in terms of what are those jobs of the future and how do we train people to enter those, and those who come straight out of school, but also communities who maybe are most distant from higher education, disadvantaged communities, equity deserving communities, and getting more young women and girls into some of these professions as well. What does that look like, and promoting that so that we're building that skill and capacity and that prosperity so that it is shared. The challenge we have is, it's like a chicken and egg. You need to build awareness so that there's demand. You've then got to be able to build the employers who are going to hire so that when we actually train students, there are real jobs for them to go to, because there's no point in training people for jobs if there's not employers in place and an ecosystem that will facilitate that. From the perspective of us as an asset holder, we've made a commitment that we want to be a net zero institution by 2050. That's what we're working towards. We've just built and we'll be opening a huge building here that is responsive and is net zero carbon mass timber building that is informed by Indigenous communities in terms of our relationship to the land and the earth, and what does that mean within this context. And we're embedding training into our curriculum, not just curriculum that's focused specifically on this, but all curriculum. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a business school, whether you're in the culinary arts, whether you're in transportation or aviation, which are two of our really big programs, that we are embedding this understanding and learning for all of our students and looking at it from the sense of responsibility and what does that mean. But I'm interested in knowing how that ecosystem is building, so that we are working together with government, with industry, and with higher education and community at the center to really plan for those that skill development. So I'll leave it there and come back to things later. Thank you. Sorry, Rob, were you talking to me?
I think he's motioning to me. Maybe he wants me to do my introduction while he figures it out, right? Yes. Okay, this is good. I mean, it's always so frustrating when you have all the tech sorted, and but that's fine. I'll build on Manjeet's statement, and I echo you, Manjeet, in saying it's great to be on this panel with some new and some familiar faces. That's great. I'm really glad that the committee's having this discussion, and I was thinking, as Sophie was talking about, how nice it is to deal with such a relatively bounded area. Like, you're talking about a big, complex city, but we also have some multiple levels of government represented here, I'm sure, on the call and in the committee's membership. So I'm Tricia Williams. I'm the Director of Research, Evaluation, Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center. For those of you who don't know the Future Skills Center, we're a forward-thinking innovation and research center that's really tasked with thinking about the future of work and skills. And how can we prepare Canadians to contribute and thrive in a really rapidly changing economy? And we take a very inclusive lens to that work and thinking about who's included and who's excluded, and how can we really be thinking ahead of kind of the problems of today, but also very, very future focused. We're only 4 years old. We're housed out of Toronto Metropolitan University in collaboration with the Conference Board of Canada and Blueprint, ADE, and where our funding comes from the federal government's Future Skills program. So we now have 250 different pilot and research projects happening nationwide, coast to coast to coast in Canada, where we're testing and innovating different solutions around the future of work and skills. And through that, we've had some area of focus on skills for sustainable futures, and how do we think about the skills and labor needs and all of the transitions that are going to be associated with moving towards a decarbonized economy, which obviously is squarely in line with the conversation today. So I wanted to point out 3 things maybe, and we'll jump into more, I'm sure, as the panel discusses. One is that we really need to figure out the skills question. And I think Sophie, starts to get to the jobs question, and the next level from that is thinking about skills. And there will be a lot of skill shifts even within jobs, and we're starting to see that already. So that's some of the things we're involved in thinking about. And then the second one is there will be a lot of upskilling and reskilling that's needed. So that it's both for people who are entering the labor force, so the kind of school to work transitions, thinking about your opportunities, but education and learning is no longer something that just happens early in your career, but we're going to have to be thinking about that throughout the life course. And then we have to think about continuing education, micro-credentials, all the ways in which we can make sure that we're upgrading our skills and abilities. And our job is to help make sure that, different approaches and ideas for that are evidence-backed and that we're testing them. And then I think the last one, which I'd be really interested in discussing more about, is how do we plan as a city, as a province, as a country, for the agility that's going to be needed If you think about that dot of 2040, there's no way we know right now the skills that will be needed in 2040. So how do we plan to bring that constant change and agility into it and plan for the financing of it? So more than, announcing funding for a new skills program, I'm thinking of what are the more durable financing mechanisms so that we can encourage people to always invest in upgrading their skills and abilities. So that's where I'll start.
Super. I hope you guys can hear me now. Yay. Okay. My headset died, so I had to actually replace the headset. Unfortunately, I had a backup. So we'll move on to the actual panel discussion next. And as I mentioned, we have 4 questions and 4 panelists. So each panelist is going to have the opportunity to start off with the question. We're doing really good in time. So actually, we're going to kind of open this up a little bit further. So rather than saying a minute, I'll give everyone a minute and a half, okay, to start the questions off. So the first question is, the City of Toronto's TransformTO net zero strategy includes ambitious targets that requires significant labor and workforce transformation to reach them. For example, all homes and buildings will need to be retrofitted to reach net zero, and this only in 15 years' time. So what challenges exist in the labor market or the availability of a qualified workforce to get us there? James, I'm going to start off with you.
All right. First off, Rob, I'm going to correct you. It's 16 and a half years time. I don't want to cut another year and a half out. It's already hard enough to get to net zero by 2040. So I'm trying to get as much time as I can. If we want to get down to counting days or months, I'm willing to do that as well. But I think you're right. It's significant. And I'm not going to go deep into the kind of the specific, labor market challenges here, because we've got some real experts on. But I'll kind of start off at the highest level, and I think everyone's going to hear a lot of themes and some fairly consistent themes today, and I'll follow up on that. And the first is really the scope, and the scope of what we're trying to achieve relative to the labor market, and not just understanding the kind of the things we're trying to change, but the type of work and the type of projects that will entail that. So we talk about retrofits for buildings, but there's also significant investments needed in infrastructure. The energy systems that are going to power an electrified Toronto, if that's the path we continue on to 2040, is going to be different. It's going to require a significant amount of investments, and we know that, and our friends at Toronto Hydro have been doing work on that and looking at, as well as the provincial government. So understanding the full scope of what needs to be done is going to be really important, and where those labor and skills gaps and needs are going to be, and when they're going to materialize. And I think that's another element that I'll put out there beyond scope, is around timing, and when the timing of labor needs start to come into play. And having worked on some large projects in the past, in particular related to transit expansion and large infrastructure development, really understanding when labor skill gaps are going to start to really present themselves is critical to delivery. And we're talking again about a pretty significant delivery in terms of what is needed. The third area, maybe challenge, I'll keep at a high level, is around competition. And I think that is going to apply not just to kind of growth in this area and the green economy, for lack of a better way to put it, in general, across the region, across the province, internationally, but also competition with other investments being made, whether it's in large infrastructure, whether it's in continued work in residential development. There is a lot of work going on that is going to require skilled labor in the same general area. And again, that's a huge opportunity, but there's potential for competition, and understanding those dynamics, I think, from a broad scale, not thinking just about how many individuals we need to put in heat pumps, but what's the growth going to be just in terms of residential development, housing, et cetera, that's also going to require investments and training and skills, and how are we looking at that big picture and not necessarily just individual projects or initiatives. And then maybe the last thing I'll end on, I think probably hear this quite a bit, a lot of this is going to require some level of certainty, whether it's for individuals who are planning their career out, whether it's for institutions who are looking at setting up courses and training programs, and whether it's for just general making investments. There's going to need to be certainty around where investments need to be made, how ambition will be met, and a lot of that's going to require work across governments to provide that certainty. And I think we can only look back in the last number of years to see times where we've moved forward in various areas, and then there's been changes and created some uncertainty. So I think being able to have clear signals around scope, timing, and providing some certainty is going to be really important for those who are going to make investments, whether it's time or money, to really be able to meet our goals and to meet that ambition.
Okay, super. Daryl, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I'm not going to take away that 1.5 years, James. 16 and a half years is not a lot of time. I guess if I'm going to pull on one thread on this particular question, and I guess retrofit was used as an example here, I think, probably required yesterday was a beginning exploration into retrofit readiness. Like, what does that mean? We're talking about all buildings need to be retrofit. Do we actually really know what that's going to take? And so if we do a bit of an audit, and whether it's be with energy modelers or with carbon people, or like looking at what industries will actually be the most affected. I know, James, you mentioned infrastructure, so that's absolutely a consideration when we're talking about electrification. But if we're looking at the building itself, let's look at the building needs to be retrofit. You're dispensing with anything that's carbon combusting. You need to fix the cladding on the outside. What does that look like, and who is going to do it? So I think hatching a plan to really understand how do we get the region ready, and understanding from the starting point, there's going to be the low-hanging fruits. There will be those industries that will be immediately and directly affected. And then think on how we help those groups scale up. So I don't want to talk specifics. I can, and we can talk about drilling all day long, and we can talk about developing infrastructure all day long, but really it cuts across so many places, so many variables, whether it's photovoltaic or electrification or heat pump industry, energy modelers, engineers, it's everybody. And so we need to understand what the intention is. What does it mean to be retrofit ready? And that type of thinking, in my opinion, requires massive coordination from all levels of government. You need a lot of industry partners to chime in, and we need a really good navigator. You need a good navigator. You need a facilitator to help with that entire convening. So I'll leave it there. That would be my thread that I want to pull on that piece.
Good. I see, Tricia, you're eager to jump in, so go ahead.
I always like echoing Daryl. But look, I think I couldn't agree more. So the temptation is to say we need more skills training programs. We need to fund more programs, open more programs. To be honest, a lot of our program partners, not all, but a lot of them have struggled with enrollment the last couple of years because the labor market's humming. Who wants to leave the labor market right now and go take a training course, right? Colleges are struggling with enrollment because people can make money right now. So I think we have to think a lot more carefully about, how do we incentivize people and businesses to invest in the future rather than just opening up more spots and programs. So it's getting the skills right, as Daryl says, like actually breaking it down. And, we have some projects that have tried that, but that is much more of a regional sectoral picture that has to happen rather than kind of at the 30,000 foot view. And the solution is not just more training programs, but it is really, I think, empowering these honest brokers about building those much more clarity about those transition pathways, what's going to be involved.
Okay. Didn't take very much time for yours. Okay. We'll get back to you shortly. Manjeet, okay. Coming from the college sector, okay. What needs to be done to get that existing challenge in the labor market and move that forward?
Mm-hmm. So as I'm listening to the conversation that James, you have created here, for me, certainty is a big thing. Like, what does the marketplace look like, and where are the jobs, and what is the certainty with those jobs, and what are the skills that are required? Because I'm not going to convince anybody either to leave the labor market or to come in straight from school to do something where they don't think there's certainty in the market in terms of a position that's available for them. What we are seeing is that, the area of adding on skills, and it was mentioned earlier in terms of micro-credentials, those shorter kinds of investments that layer on are something that, certainly the college is looking at in terms of what does that look like. But the question always is, we can do that. We have the abilities in terms of those technical pieces, but it's really understanding what's out there and where the pressures are in terms of really moving the sector forward. Secondly, I'd say, in terms of any of this work, it is we work directly with industry partners in terms of the development of our program. So there's no way we would be doing any of this alone. So it engages industry partners in terms of what are the skills that are needed out there to create real pathways to employment, so that, there's a direct channel there. And also working with government partners in terms of any legislation and any sort of look at those things to make sure that the programming that is being provided is governed in a way that there's a level of quality assurance too. Because we are also seeing that, training is now occurring by various parties, some of them by private sector, by industry themselves, and others in this sector. And I think we just need to get a bit of an understanding of what kind of training is being offered, where is it being offered, and what are the sort of structures that are controlling and ensuring quality assurance to that moving forward. But there's a variety of different training models. And as I said, we've invested in all of our training just to make sure that we're adding that in, so it gives our students a bit of a competitive edge because they're thinking about this. But when it comes to sort of very specific kinds of training, where we have put it in place, we've worked with industry partners, and it's tended to be around EV vehicles, because we sort of know that as a bit of an entity, but still there are questions around that. And then sort of aviation and other transportation modes.
Manjeet,
working with the
I'm going to jump in. Okay, you're actually starting to answer the next question. So let's go back to James. Okay, to go the second round. Okay, so James, you've heard different perspectives. Okay, what have you heard from the other panelists that kind of reverberates or you might disagree with?
So I think a lot of it I definitely agree with. It is that what we have, and oftentimes with government, is we have those really high level plans. We have concepts, and we've gone beyond that in certain areas. When we're talking about buildings, we can start to get into building archetypes and start to look at what actually is necessary. But for the general part, we have a sense of what is needed, whether it's the envelope of the building, it's the systems inside for heating and cooling. So we have those general areas. I think what is the discussion of how that actually starts to roll out? When is it needed? What are those? What are the technologies or the work that we're going to support? What programs are government going to put in place that support activity and scale? The thing about a lot of what we're planning on doing is it's not new. It's just that it's been done at such a small scale relative to what we need to do that trying to figure out how you go from few hundred homes a year, getting on to lower or deep retrofits into tens of thousands or more than that to meet ambition. It's really that challenge of, well, how do you transition from that and take the learnings that you have already and then start to apply it to that larger scale? But also to think about how that rolls out and when it rolls out across different areas. What are we trying to get to first, and who are we trying to get to? Because there's so many different things we could be doing.
Super. Daryl, any second thoughts on this?
No, I think there's looking at, we were given the questions in advance. So I think that we'll bring forward some other concerns and commentary as the conversation goes on.
Sure.
That's
Tricia? And
No, it's okay for now. Same.
and Manjeet.
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next question. Manjeet, I'm going to have you kind of lead off the discussion on this. And this one's a relatively complex one because there's 4 elements to it. You know, the first one is, how do we ensure the right people, trained and qualified, are available for the net zero strategy actions? 2, how do we ensure proper training for both for new training, retraining, and upskilling for the required workforce? 3, who should lead in determining what training is needed? And finally, beyond academic institutions, who do we involve in the training? And Manjeet, you were touching a lot of these, you know, at the end of this, so you can jump in and run with it now.
Oh, yeah, no, Rob, I apologize. I think I started jumping into the question straight away.
No, this is fine. I don't mind this.
It's very exciting, right? And I think that, you know, as the number of the panelists have mentioned, there are many different types of training that are offered. And there's, you know, the general training that is offered in all kinds of programs. We embed net zero sustainability thinking into everything we do. But then there's targeted training, right? And it's focused training. But I keep reiterating that it's difficult to plan that training and get someone to come in and do that and invest their time and their money, and the money that is lost if they're leaving a job to come and do it, if there's not a level of certainty. And I think that lack of certainty is something that's sort of putting sort of pressure on all of us to think about how we do this. The other thing is, for a college, for a certified government regulated program, there's time involved in developing it, getting all the regulatory requirements around it and putting it into place. So time is of the essence to plan and then to put those things in place. But there are lots of other things that are also possible, and the sort of surge of micro-credentials and also industry-specific training that is outside of the government regulated piece are pieces that certainly that colleges and others can work with, but they do demand that you work with the content experts, and that's the industry people, right? It's like, what do you need? What's happening out there? What are the skills that we can make sure that our graduates collectively from all of the post-secondary institutions can really be building in the actual skills that people need to do those jobs. But there's a sort of back and forth on what's needed there. And I would say that the regulation of training is important, because we want to make sure that, you know, when someone goes through that, it is, that regulation's enforced, that is quality training, that people are going out, and that the public also knows and other partners know that training is something that's involved. From a partnership perspective, and I've said before that this work involves all sectors. It involves government, right, in terms of what government requirements might be in the regulation of training. It involves industry, and it involves community. And we talked earlier about making sure that building awareness, both of the need for all of us as, in our personal lives to sort of address this issue, but also in our professional lives, like what can we be doing and what are the sort of options available for us to go and train, graduate, and then enter into the workforce. It's that ecosystem that's important to us. So I will leave it there, because I think I said quite a bit before.
Tricia, I'm going to turn this over to you now to get your perspective on these 4 key points.
I mean, it's we've got a lot to do to get the right training in place. I keep coming back to, I think there's one key group that I hope we'll talk about too, which is also newcomers, which I think is a really critical issue for the City of Toronto, given the number of new arrivals to Canada who arrive and who aren't able to use their kind of skills and training. Either it's not recognized, or they don't have the right kind of certifications. So I think that's absolutely something we have to do better at, using internationally trained talent. But I think we have to think about the incentives for people to invest in training. And right now, employers in Canada tend to underinvest in training as well compared to OECD peers, right? We government funding tends to prioritize kind of the short-term kind of success things of getting people to finish a program. And we are in a lot of times throwing a dart at the dartboard and saying, oh, we hope we got the right skills right, or we hope we got the right programs. Not to say it's not informed. Like, I know everyone's trying their best. Like, people are trying their best, but we don't have crystal balls either. So I think you're absolutely right, James, that we need to make some choices around the kind of technologies and infrastructure that's going to need to be there. And from that, we can know the kinds of skills that we need. But I keep coming back to, how are we really going to support employers in scaling up? Right. At the end of the day, a lot of these solutions will involve private sector entities. And can we, not have training and training delivery be kind of in a separate sphere than basically a lot of the private sector solutions that are going to drive a lot of these net zero goals? How do we bring those bodies closer together? Which is why I think Daryl's point at the beginning about bringing people together who are going to help broker these solutions is going to be so critical.
Okay, Daryl, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to also throw out kind of another issue that Manjeet brought up. Okay, and she mentioned, that because there's a lack of uncertainty of these new jobs that are being developed, it's really hard to get people do retraining for these new jobs that are coming. So it runs into this workforce attraction issue, and I've heard this from multiple green industries that they just can't get enough people, okay, to work at the jobs currently. Okay. And what's going to happen when you're requiring these industries to grow rapidly? So, I'm going to throw to you, these 4 questions, but also, like, how do you deal with getting workers to work for your company?
All right, that's a lot, but this is a grand challenge. I think that's what we're all here to discuss today. So, I guess what's in my head right now is, Tricia mentioned that, employers traditionally have been underfunding training. All right. And for reasons that are obvious, like they're running a business, we're running a business. How do we spend our time and allocate resources and people power to move into training when there's no incentive? And that's taking away from our bottom line. So, maybe think on ways to devise like incentive programs for on-job training programs. That would maybe help some industry partners, come forward with a little bit more effort and time to spend upskilling individuals. Does that guarantee the firm who's been training first pick at the litter? Do we get to employ those people directly? Or are we risking our time and energy upskilling people that are either going to go to a competitor, they're going to move out of province, seek employment elsewhere with the acumen that we provided? Like these are real concerns, real risks. And then you move into the whole aspect of like, okay, so let's say green energy transition, this has to happen. There's going to be reliance on some new technology. How do you then ensure QA/QC on new technologies? Who is doing that? You, again, relying on industry to make sure that everything is buttoned up when things are deployed. And so where's the carrot? Where's that incentive? And so I think largely this conversation is around bringing in industry partners at the ground level and working really collaboratively to make sure that their needs get looked after, vehicles to help industry partners scale rapidly. Like, we need supports too in order to do that. Not only are we trying to train an industry, we need supports to try to help us build our business. So maybe there is that model on the job training that can work. From our perspective, what we do is fairly specialized. There's one college in Ontario, if maybe even all of Canada to our scan, that specializes in a drilling program. So if we're moving into the heat pump world, and our business is delivering geo-exchange systems that require an abundance of drilling and drillers, there's one institution, and they don't specialize in urban geosystems. They don't specialize in urban drilling. They specialize, or they generalize. And many of those graduates go out west to do exploration because the money's great. So how do we localize employment? How are we incentivizing people to stay here? And then we'll probably get into the conversation later about affordability, because at the end of the day, like, these are better than entry-level jobs, but affordability comes into a big question. So I'll park it there. I think that there's obviously lots to discuss, but bottom line is better coordination, consultation with the right industry partners. And I don't think we need to, from my perspective, if everything's pointing to electrification, you don't need certainty. Look at all of the industries that are going to be there. So there's your certainty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and James.
A lot to follow up there in terms of Daryl. I think he's raised some pretty big questions. The affordability one, and I think is going to be a huge challenge because that this work, if it takes the path that it's meant to take, is going to be happening everywhere. And how does a location like Toronto compete with others where the affordability question will be key? I think kind of from our discussions, and especially with industry in certain areas, there are places where the industry is mature in terms of what they do, and it really is around kind of the additional skills. So the heating and cooling industry, moving from air conditioning to heat pump, we're not talking significant changes. There's a lot of similarities, but there is new skills that are needed to be learned and training that needs to happen. But this, I think, comes back a little bit to the certainty side, which is if you're running a business, are you going to make those investments, and when are you going to make those investments if the business isn't there at the other end, if the clients aren't installing the heat pumps at the pace that government is telling you to make those investments because policies, programs, other aspects aren't keeping up. And I think we're hearing that in a lot of our discussions, which is more from the certainty aspect of, we all say we're going to electrification, but the scope and scale of how that is moving isn't necessarily keeping up to the ambition, which comes back to making sure that our programs, policies, standards, etc., are lined up with where we're indicating the ambition. So people are making investments and expecting and able to make a return on that. And again, there has been lots of experiences in the past where things have started up, whether it's in development of renewable energy or others, and we haven't necessarily seen that continuation over the long haul, which I think has, as I hear from industry, has raised questions around commitment before investments are made. And maybe the last thing I would add, just in terms of back to the question, in terms of who to involve beyond industry, I think it absolutely needs to be involved, the discussions with labor, the unions and others around what the plans are. And I think kind of to Daryl's point, which is really getting all these groups together and having these kind of deep discussions and then understanding what needs to be in place to support that, whether it's a policy perspective, a program perspective, investments, whether it's in training, in labor, or it's incentive programs that then push action on the other side that support and promote investments, because of the people knowing that, yes, there's going to be activity that follows.
Super. Wow, that was a really interesting first round. And Manjeet, okay, you've got the ability of following up on everything.
Thank you. And Daryl, I wanted to follow up with you in terms of industry and the supports that industry needs. And I agree with you. I hear that from our industry partners all the time, that they're busy doing what they're doing. You're running your business, you're getting your products and services out there. And how can colleges and universities support our industry partners with the ability to test products, to innovate, to work with our entrepreneurs and the skills that they need, and really build that collaboration where you're developing a pipeline. And while nothing's ever totally guaranteed, but there is a pipeline that when we're partnering with you, and maybe that student is in class 2 days a week and they're working with you 3 days a week, and we're doing that together, that we're actually creating something that's going to be a real partnership and collaboration in that area. The piece I wanted to sort of, and I think some of you may know about it already, is the Earth District work that Centennial and U of T Scarborough have been doing, where we really brought together, the U of T, Centennial, Ontario Tech, Fleming, Trent, like a group of universities and colleges that have come together and said, you know what, we need to pay big attention to this, put big time on this. And we're going to create a space in our city that is going to be a center for research, center for testing of products, where we train people and where we're going to have industry partners who can come in with real sort of challenges and opportunities and work with those big minds and people who are skilling our next generation of workers out there with what they need, and put us on the map and also make us globally competitive. Because I think that's the other thing, and I'm sure my colleagues in ECDEV would say that as a city and as a country, we also want to be globally competitive and understand what's happening around the world as well, so that we can actually make sure we're staying in front of that. So some of my colleagues who are on the call will drop in the links to the Earth District, but it's a fascinating piece for us to sort of think about in terms of what is happening in Toronto. And the last thing I'd say is, I don't know whether our industry partners know what the various universities and colleges are already doing in that training, reskilling, and that development, because I would bet there's more stuff going on that maybe that you know about, because you don't have time for that. You're busy doing what you're doing. And is it incumbent on us to be able to make sure that we're linking and providing that information to you? So just a little bit to add.
Can I just on that? So, Manji, I appreciate your comments. Just I think you'll be pleased to know that GeoSource is a partner. We're inside of the Earth ecosystem already. So, thank you for bringing that up. And again, not every company out there is going to have a line of sight to what all the various universities and colleges are doing. Speaking from our seat, I can say that we have a very good handle on what's happening out there. And what we're seeing is on the engineering side, on the university piece. I think that the region, Ontario, we've got such a strong backbone of academic institutions. There's going to be no shortage there. Colleges doing some really good work. I mean, your challenges are also beyond just this side of producing talent. I think the healthcare sector is a large, client of the college sector, and that has a massive demand as well. So I appreciate that. Talking about buildings. So if you're talking about buildings, you need to talk about labor in that context. You need to talk about the boots on the ground. And I think that's where we need to do a little bit more hard thinking about how do we motivate people to join the movement, this green revolution, to apply boots on the ground. You need people with those skills. You need people with the tough, thick skin to duke it out in really hot days and really cold days, to be outside. We're talking buildings. So I would say shift the focus to that side of the labor market.
Okay, Tricia, any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think these kind of initiatives are great, Angie. I think it's super. I think, a couple of things. We have the Canadian private sector is disproportionately represented by small and medium enterprises, right? We have most of our private sector is small and medium enterprises, which is different than the US, for instance. So I think you start to see in a smaller firm, and Darryl, you're right, you don't have a training department. I always joke, I'm not worried about the big banks. I'm they have, employee professional development programs. They have their solutions. So we're solving for the issues mostly around SMEs, and which are disproportionately represented by historically marginalized groups, right? So there's a huge equity angle here, which is really critical and important. And who has time to invest in training? And these are really hard questions. It isn't like they're new. I think in the labor circles, we've been discussing these same issues for 20, 30 years. But I do think, it's becoming more and more critical for us to solve for these sort of things. I also think there's a fundamental issue around labor productivity that we will probably have to wrestle with as we try to reach our net zero goals, right? And labor productivity has to do with, either technology or, processes or systems and or else it's, usually skills development and basically producing more per worker than we have in the past. And I think when you talk about global competitiveness, Manjeet, like that's going to be really critical for Canada. That's really critical for us to meeting our goals and to continue to have, inclusive prosperity in Canada.
Mhm.
So I think we have to invest as a society. Now we have to figure out who pays for it and how do we get the different bodies there. And I think initiatives like Earth, we've got some other ones, they're good, but we haven't been very good as a society about helping them scale.
Yeah.
Right. And we have a lot of little pilot programs. There's so many great organizations in Toronto running different skills development programs, even at more community levels. But how do we move them to scale? And I think those are some of the questions we're investing in. And that, I'm excited because our projects are scheduled to wrap up this year, and then we're going to have some ideas about how you do that. So I'd love to come back and discuss more of like what we learned on that.
Yeah. And I would agree with that, Tricia. I think that the issue of scaling, absolutely. And I think that's the challenge that the Earth District group have. And I think the inclusive prosperity, and I said that at the beginning of this, that, that's key. I mean, I look at our population group that comes to this college, and like yours and many others in our universities, like 2/3 of them are born outside of Canada. There's at least half.
We're going to get into that question. Okay, again, you're ahead of the curve, Manjeet. Next question. Let's James wrap this one up. Okay, and I mean, you heard a lot of issues, being articulated. Okay, but the big issue that I've heard in this discussion is how do we scale?
Hey, Rob, if I had the answer for that, I would be getting a patent and selling that. That is the question that we see across the globe. Every municipality, every region that I speak to is having the same challenges. There's lessons, but how you move into scale and how you do that in a way where you have the kind of all the different parts of the ecosystem working together is that key challenge. And not to kind of leave you with no answer at all. I think it is the challenge that you can't look to government to solve. I think it's going to be a lot of the partners sitting down, kind of working through the pieces all exist. It's how all the pieces come together and work together in a very complex system that is really the challenge we're trying to get to. And that's not that, if I knew the answer, I'd write a book and then sell it, but I don't.
Okay. The ongoing discussion. Okay, the next question is very much more focused. We're starting to touch on that towards the end of the last discussion on equity and inclusivity. And it's how do we maximize training and working opportunities for everyone in this transformation, including supporting workers in transition, the gig workers, participants in vulnerable equity-deserving communities, gender equality, participation from local, small businesses and industry. There's a whole bunch of inclusivity issues surrounding so many of the green industries. So, Tricia, I'm going to let you kind of start with this one.
I mean, this is such a critical element of this, right? Like I keep coming back to like really understanding the skills involved, right? And like you can do that now, right? Like we did a project with Canada Green Homes Building Council and looking at the skills involved in the retrofit sector and mapping where we are now. And we pilot tested a program to, help people in the sector like learn new skills around the retrofits, right? Like, so this is absolutely necessary. And I think the reality is like we're seeing pretty clearly like some groups need more supports, right? Like people need more supports, whether it's around language support or childcare or flexibility, anti-racism training, right? Like we need to really think about not just delivering the technical training, but all the things that make it successful. And actually, we have one program that's doing some really great service delivery for very marginalized groups that have been long-term unemployed. And we've seen the government of Nova Scotia reduce their public assistance budget. So it doesn't have to be a net budget cost, but you can actually see cost savings, right? But I think that involves pilot testing programs, looking at the results, and then doubling down on the investments and thinking about, right now, there isn't a lot of incentive for organizations to admit what isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing I'd like to see us shift a little bit in Canada, right? So it doesn't encourage a lot of innovation because, if, everyone's program says it's working, right? Because we have a system which, is basically, we don't reward failure at all, which is, I think, is to our own detriment. So I think these are hard things. On the gig worker thing, I think we have to recognize that skills training fits within a larger context of kind of economic vulnerability. I think, Daryl, you pointed to affordability challenges like housing. Toronto is not, like, this is such a huge issue, right? And it's a whole area of policy that is not my area of expertise. But I will say we're absolutely not going to solve our labor and skills challenges without thinking of interrelated challenges around housing affordability. And also, I would also say access to wider kind of safety nets. So our employment insurance, program is not available to gig workers. Mental health supports. We're seeing a huge mental health crisis among young people, especially. And, people who don't have access to mental health supports, because that's usually, those kinds of benefits are usually tied to your workplace. So I think these are wider social safety net questions that we can't separate totally from the skills and labor questions. And to expect that we're going to have a great labor force that helps us achieve net zero without paying attention to those other social fabric issues, I think is not in our, it isn't in our interest.
Okay, good. Daryl, I'm going to let you follow up with Tricia. She's followed up with you on a couple of times, so now's your opportunity.
I agree with everything Tricia says all the time. That absolutely, like you again, they're not called grand challenges, I say they are called grand challenges for a reason, right? So absolutely pay mind to affordability, transportation. Let's go there for a quick second. Like, our teams have to be at work sites pretty early in the morning, pretty late at night. And if they can't afford to live where they are, they have to get to where they have to work. And that first mile, last mile, it's not really that convenient, I'll tell you. So you got to have to look at that and contemplating things like training in place, right? Plan for that. Try to hire from within the communities that these projects are going up in. The new developments, retrofits, they're happening all over. We already know transit-oriented cities are there. The plan is all laid out. How do we find ways to hire from within? And we work fairly regularly trying to identify community partners that allow us to get a little bit more in touch with the local community so that we can present an option for employment. Maybe think about targeting particular segments inside of these communities. One of the things that we talk about regularly, given that type of work that we do and the type of employment we need, is to really think about how do we promote and be attractive to NEET youth. So NEET being not in education, employment, or training. We offer great opportunities for a starting point to start to learn how to do what we do and move them into industry. These are some of the things that we think about. And how do you maximize? What I would love to see? I would love to see somebody come up with a massive marketing campaign to make this type of work really attractive. We can't do it. We're a small but mighty company, but that's not my responsibility. Who out there can put together a really Tony marketing campaign to tell everybody, and I'm talking everybody, build that catch as large as you want, to say that there's really great employment and great opportunities for career advancement coming our way. So is that motivated by the layers of government? Is that motivated by some large community agency? I don't know. But that would be really helpful to raise the awareness and saying that this is coming, man. Like, we need people. So
I'm just going to jump in because it's interesting. You talk about that workforce attraction, and a colleague of myself, Sean Weldrake. Okay, we've just finished wrapping up a bike industry initiative, and that's one of the biggest issues is workforce attraction. How do you do that marketing to bring more people into these new parts of the economy? James, I'm going to let you jump in here.
I don't have a lot to add because I think some really great points added. I think we can look at some of the successes we have seen. The Toronto Community Benefits Network, and some of the work that they have done primarily on large infrastructure projects. But how do we take the lessons learned from those types of initiatives and the work they're doing, and apply it to projects which aren't necessarily large infrastructure, a subway or an LRT project, but look at it in terms of kind of activities that are a bit more dispersed. But I think a critical part of this is talking and working directly with those communities. And we hear that we have got a climate advisory group, which has, folks from communities across the city who are just committed to action on climate change. And I think one of the key things we hear from them all the time is, look, you need to talk to the communities. You need to be engaging directly. That conversation, it can't be a discussion that happens in Queen's Park or Nathan Phillips Square or wherever government office you want to take. It has to be a local discussion. It has to be very engaged, and it has to be directly with the folks that you're looking to have thinking about the opportunities that exist here. It's kind of no different from the people we're trying to get to take up climate action. Is the opposite side of that, the people we're trying to get to become interested in the opportunities of climate action and helping others to do that. It's again back to that complex ecosystem, but it's a key element of that. So I'll stop there because I think Daryl and Trisha have really kind of raised a number of really good points in terms of some of those areas that are going to need to be resolved to take advantage.
Okay, Manjeet.
So yes, ditto to everybody. I mean, I think local hiring makes so much sense, right? Because you're not traveling out, here in my area here, we've got the work happening on the Golden Mile. There's a whole strategy for local hiring, local businesses. How do you share that prosperity? And how do you, sort of knowing some certainty on timelines, train people with the skills that they're going to need? I look at, the vast number of international students that we have coming to Canada and Toronto. They are our new generation of Canadians. They're our new Canadians. They're not people that are just transitioning through. They're staying and they're going to be contributors. So how do we sort of make sure that we're providing details on this area of work for those who are choosing to come to Canada to study and to stay, and those who are coming through, through other immigration, are newcomers or refugees? Like there's an ability to engage a population group that maybe has been here for generations, but has been is disadvantaged and is equity deserving. There are newcomers that are coming, and they bring skills and expertise and knowledge and global understanding that we are simply not availing ourselves of because we're not having full enough conversations with them to do that. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. In terms of marketing campaigns, Daryl, we've seen some of the stuff that's happening around the trades generally, and making the trades more interesting or appealing to populations who maybe have not been going in. I agree with you. I think that we being able to tell the story that there is an ability to prosper in this area of work, that these are the things that you can either do right from the beginning or skills that you can add on, that will give you a trajectory as this market is going to increase. We don't know exactly, but it's going to become more vibrant because it's happening in other parts of the world. So agree with everything. Yeah.
Okay, so just a real quick second round, because I want to leave enough time for the next question, the last question, which is going to be the wrap-up question. So, Tricia, you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say, they're having information sessions on the skilled trades at my daughter's elementary school, which I do find a little disturbing. Because not that I mind if she goes into the skilled trades, I'd love it. But I do think we have to be careful what our goal is here. But look, I think we're at an era where, I think we have to really think about a new narrative around the jobs and skills for net zero transitions. We released some research last year that modeled 3 different pathways to net zero, and it'll depend on what are some of the infrastructure choices. I think it's great to see Toronto kind of saying, okay, here's where we really need to lean in. But every scenario we modeled for a country as a whole was a net job creator. Right. And I don't think that narrative is really sticking in people's heads, that like they see this and they're kind of like, well, why are all these immigration target numbers out there? Right. Like, why do we need all these people? And so this idea of like working within scarcity, and actually there's so much opportunity, but the reality is there's going to be so much change. Right. So change is the new normal. And I think giving a sense of where are we starting from and where are we moving to? So I think we could break that down now very specifically by region and sector over the next coming years, right? And how do we help move people from to opportunities? And then how do we smooth that? It isn't just sign up for this program, but here's some salary support. Here's an employer who's has a job at the end of the line for you. And that is connecting these disparate parts of our ecosystem right now that tend to be a little bit separate from each other. Not always, but on a systems level, they tend to be operating a little bit more separately.
Okay, super. Eddie, last thoughts on this question before we move on to the last question? Nope. Okay, so we're into the last one. Okay, and we're not bad on time, but try to keep your thoughts as precise as possible on this one, just so we can wrap it up right on time. And the question is, how are industry and training institutes going to meet the need of the dramatic increase in the number of workers needed to meet the net zero goals? And what are the challenges that are going to be faced along the way to this rapid growth? So Daryl, okay, this is all about industry. Okay, you're up.
I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer to that. How? I don't know how. How is industry, depending on what industry, and I don't know what the academic priorities are for the various institutes that are out there. So I don't have an answer to that. But what I can share is what we're doing. Again, we're classified as an SME, but we're small, but we're mighty. And Tricia, you mentioned earlier about most SMEs that you've come across. Maybe you've done some analysis or research on that. You're saying that they don't have a training program. We do. We've had to develop our own training program because of the lack of actual systemic support that's out there. So this is something that we've taken on in order for us to be able to scale the way that we need to scale, the way that our ambitions come across. This is what we need to do. So we actually have a pretty comprehensive training program to bring people up to speed in the work that we do. Now, having said that, much of this is around our innovation and our IP. And I know that, James, you mentioned if you knew, you'd have a patent. What's cool about GeoSource, we actually have a patent. We have a process patent. We have a patent in the US. We have an intention grant from the EU, and the Canadian patent will soon to follow. But that process patent that we hold is why we've developed our own training platform. Because what they learn is proprietary to us. Is it transferable to others in industry? Absolutely. But we want to make sure that we look after self first. Why? Because we got a business to run. But we have that patent. So that idea around technology, giving yourselves a competitive advantage, Tricia, you also mentioned around labor productivity. So one of the things that we do is it's our technology that actually enables this for us. We actually have better productivity, in our industry because of the types of machines that we use. It doesn't require, significant heavy lifting like others in industry do. Our technology allows us to bring in the types of workers that wouldn't necessarily find their way into this vocation. So it's a nice little mix between technology, innovation, and allowing access for employment and work. So these are some of the things that we are doing as a company, and we need to scale. In order to meet the demand here, it's not just our company that needs to scale; it's the entire industry that has to scale. Yeah. We're talking about widespread adoption of heat pumps, And our view is that ground source is the way to go, especially at large scale, for the types of buildings that are coming online and the types of buildings that need to be retrofit. This is where we see it. And that's the kind of labor that we need. So yeah, we've had to respond in order to kind of get to where we are. We've developed our own methodologies. And that's what we're doing to address this kind of oncoming demand.
Okay, good. Now I see we only have 3 questions from the audience. So audience, okay, now's your time to send me the questions so we can carry on this great conversation. But in the meantime, okay, we can kind of likely push on this question to go into it a little bit more detail. Manjeet, okay, so the question kind of was industry and training institutions. So from the college perspective.
So I think in terms of meeting the demands for training, I keep going back to we need to better understand what the needs of industry partners are and the type of training, skill development that's needed and where it's needed, right? So as a college, we have a level of agility that I think sometimes, universities may not have. I don't know, right? Tricia can tell me if I'm wrong from that perspective, but a level of agility sometimes with the kinds of programs, shorter programs and other things that we're able to offer. We have an agility where we can actually work very closely with industry partners in sort of innovating, testing, creating very, very specific industry-related programs and services. But even with that agility, it's not quick, right? It's, being able to build curriculum and stuff. So having that level of going back to certainty and knowing what that looks like. And then it goes to, some of the other challenges that a college or university is going to have is in some of these skills areas where it's really hands-on training that's needed is, space, equipment, all of these kinds of things become something that one has to think about and where they're going. So that can take a little time, but there is an agility, there's a willingness. And I do think that, as we see Earth ramping up, that may be a place that might offer some ability to ramp up innovation and training with the collaboration of a number of different universities and colleges working together. So it's not just one. We might not do heat pumps, but maybe another does, right? So doing that kind of collaboration between the higher education sector to be able to respond to research needs, training needs, innovation needs, testing needs, all of those together. Okay, I will leave it at that.
Okay, James, what are your thoughts on this?
I was hoping you'd leave me for last, Rob. Not being industry or training institute, but I'll be very brief as I'm not from industry or training institute. But I'd say kind of based on nearly 20 years experience in government, I think the conversation that we need to have is to understand what those needs are and where we can help and what is needed from government and what is not needed as well. Sometimes, and having been in this in government for a long time, we try to solve problems that maybe aren't there, or we try to solve problems and in doing so create new problems. So I think that conversation around, as we develop further the policies and programs and the ambition and the targets and the pathways, an early discussion, Daryl's mentioned this a few times, around what problem are we trying to solve and what supports are needed to solve that problem. Right. And I would say a detailed discussion of that, not a general, high level. Then we'll come off and we'll come back with something to try to sort that out in terms of a program, but a real collaborative approach. And I think that kind of gets back to another theme on climate change in general, which is this is going to require significant collaboration. This is not anyone going off and kind of trying to solve it themselves. I often use the analogy, we're in a marathon here, 16 and a half year long marathon if you're in the city of Toronto, and it would be all great if we're all running in the same direction in the marathon, as opposed to just kind of scattering in different approaches and running our own race. So I think kind of back to that theme, it really is going to be around collaboration and what is needed and how can we then support what is needed.
Super. And Tricia, I'm going to have you wrap this question up.
Yeah, I mean, look, Absolutely collaboration. But to be honest, I've been mulling something over lately, and I mean, I don't know if the panel is a great place to mull over ideas, but this is what we do in the marketplace of ideas now, right? I'm just thinking a little bit about if you start to imagine like the training system of the future, right? Like imagine us 40, 50 years from now. What does that look like? What does the training? And I think we're in a period of profound disruption. And I would think that not all institutions will survive that. Frankly, I don't know which ones will, which ones won't, but I predict that they won't all survive. And the ones that do, I think will be, there will probably be a space for kind of the very esoteric research that's very theory based. And absolutely, we need that in our society. But I think there's also going to be an ability to stay closer to what industry needs and stay closer to those skills needs. And I think it's the institutions that really figure out how to do that and how to really solve problems for the private sector and for the economic engines of our country. I think those are the educational institutions that will probably survive. If I think about it. So I think we're going to have to think about all those things that I think Manjeet gave us some good examples of what that looks like in practice, and more of those things. I think as long as we can encourage more of that, I think those are the kinds of institutional programs that we're going to need more of going forward.
Okay, good.
Can I just jump in real fast?
Real fast.
It's not a complete thought, but Manjeet, you mentioned about space. We're going to need space. Actually, if you're talking about buildings and changing what they're doing, you actually need projects. I don't think it's space. You actually need an asset to work on. And what better asset than municipal assets to be the backdrop for a living classroom? So James, I hope you're nodding there. I'm still a little bit further away, but if that's the case, you need space, you need projects. Who's gonna pay for that? Like, you've got all these asset owners that need to make good on their long-term investments in the private sector. And then now they have to retrofit. They need the right people to come forward and not to mess up their project. So if the municipalities, if they want to really put a foot forward, open up your roster of physical assets and make that the classroom. I'll leave it there.
Interesting last thought. Okay, I'm going to get into the questions. Okay, from the participants, we've had a bunch. Okay, that just showed up. Okay, so let me go through the first one from Simone, and she's very interested in micro credentials. Okay, and wanted to know, Daryl, have you had any experience with that, and what's your perspective from the employer point of view, and then from Manjeet? Okay, what's the process to develop a micro-credential program?
No, I think maybe we just move that straight to Manjeet. We don't really have much experience on that front.
Okay, so I can answer it as well as I can. So remember, I'm not an academic. So I think, really the process that we've followed is we are exploring the areas where a short program, a credential in something is going to be helpful to particularly our industry partners. That's what we work with, right? So, and the process is to start working with that partner to look at what the need is, or ourselves if there's a need there, and to develop the curriculum and the profile and to submit it so that it gets the authorization to be able to use that, right? Because these things are credentials. They do need to be approved, but they provide a shorter, more intensive additional piece to something that we might be doing already, right? So, Daryl, in your case, if there was an area around the industry that there is a very specific kind of need that is transferable and usable as well, then, we might begin a conversation around what does that look like? What does that credential look like to be able to advance that? So Tricia might be able to add a bit more than that on that one, since as I said, I don't come from the academic side of the school.
Oh, I'm the world's worst academic. I mean, despite my job title, I'm much more about, the doing. But look, I think to me, micro-credentials are a really interesting example of, I think, how the college and university sector is trying to stay relevant, which I think is great. So that I really support in terms of they're trying to find products that are very relevant to the shifting landscape we're in. What I think are two very important empirical questions there. I'm pulling out my inner nerd. Empirical questions. The first of which is, does a micro-credential make any difference in a person's job career trajectory? Does it actually pay off? Right? Do they get a promotion? Do they get a new job? Do they get a salary bump from it? And that, I think, is a question we haven't totally answered yet, but certainly we're looking into it. But I'd encourage, programs to look at that. What are the outcomes of this? Not just how many people finish it. Right. And the second, I think, also empirical question is, are employers saying, yes, these people have the skills we want? Right? And I think, like you said, Manjeet, this is in response to demand. Right. So our employers saying that. We just released some research last week surveying employers in the manufacturing sector in Northern Alberta. And across Alberta, we worked with NATE, Northern Alberta Institute for Technology. Mm-hmm. And actually, the results were not that great. Employers are like, we're not really buying this. We're not really saying, yes, somebody has this micro-credential, we're going to hire them. Mm-hmm. It was a little bit more on the continuing ed side. So to me, I know colleges and universities are all gung-ho on micro-credentials. I'm not convinced yet. But I like the spirit of it. I love the spirit of trying to innovate and do something different. But I can't think we can assume this is the solution that's going to fix all these problems.
I agree. I think it's one of the solutions. It's an ability to be agile and nimble and responsive to what is actually needed. It's also an ability to be able to provide something that is accredited for somebody who can't do a 2-year, 1-year, 3-year program. And we are seeing businesses producing their own kinds of credentials, short credentials, right, out there. And
it's the wild, wild west of credentials right now, right?
It is the wild west of credentials for sure.
James, do you have anything to add to this one?
I do not.
Okay. Then let's move on to the next one. And then the next one is a really good follow-up question. It's from Natalie. Okay. And her question is, what are institutions doing to make training more accessible to working people who can't afford to stop working to participate in training? And this kind of follows up to one of those earlier discussions about, like, where are the training programs, that are on job? Okay. So people can't, don't necessarily have to take time off from being paid to learn these things. And I know one of the challenges that I'm seeing is, so many of the green industries, they're not considered skilled, trades, and so there's no apprenticeship program. So Daryl, I'll let you start with this one.
I'm trying to understand the question, Rob.
So it's really focused on institutions, okay, but what are institutions doing to make training more accessible to working people who can't afford to stop working? But from your perspective as an employer, right? Okay, I want to get that from you before I turn it over to the academic people.
What are the institutions doing? Look, again, I'm coming back to, there aren't very many institutions helping our industry train people at the moment. So I will have to defer.
Okay.
It just doesn't exist.
Okay. Tricia, you had your hand up.
I mean, this is one of, I think, the advantages of, COVID, everything going remote, lots of disadvantages, but we saw this incredible leapfrogging of, I can't tell you how many of our project partners, they said we were going to deliver this in person and now we had to go online. And it kind of gave this natural experiment. In some cases now people are going back and they're saying, you know what, some of this really needs to be in person. It's very experiential learning, but I think we're figuring out what can be delivered remotely and what can't, which of course, remote delivery has incredible opportunities for equity, inclusion, and on people's own on-demand time. The other thing I'll say is we have a really interesting partnership with Skill Plan, which is a training organization around the skilled trades. And we supported developing a common platform to put all sorts of training materials on there. I think it's a great example of where technology can really spur, opportunities and accessibility. All of that is predicated again on the wider policy thing of people need broadband internet, they need access to these things, and they still need time. I mean, there's really no substitute for time. One of my hopes is that we see a reinvestment around a personal training credit or a business training credit, something that's pretty significant at scale that really puts some money on the table for people to invest in their own training.
Manjeet?
Okay, I'll follow up.
You're nodding and saying, yeah.
it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I mean, I look at our population here, and we've been just talking about equity and diversity. Like, people can't afford to leave a job to go and get training, right? That's lost income. And they can't afford on top of that to pay for the fees that are needed for those professions and stuff when they're balancing things. And they're maybe balancing a family, right? Because this is not just young people straight out of school. You're talking about people who have other responsibilities as well. I think COVID did show us a great example of the way in which training can be provided. And I think institutions, went totally online. Then it's like everybody coming back. And I think now it is a conversation of, are there different ways in which we can provide this? And we're looking at this ourselves, not only for domestically, but internationally. So in-place training, and to be able to develop that kind of training so that it is not just sitting there listening to someone, that it is more than that, and experiential, and does offer some ability to be on site as well. And I think that will reach a lot of different population groups who are balancing things in their lives. It's not there yet. I think we're all in the process of developing it, and it will have, I think, a positive impact on many communities. You're balancing life and work. Maybe there are accessibility issues and you can't leave your home, right? Maybe you're traveling from here to another part of the world. So it will, I think when we look at that, it will benefit a lot of different populations, but the primary piece is, equity deserving communities who can't afford to do this. So more to follow later on, Rob, on that one.
Okay. And this was not really a setup question. I actually got it. Okay. And it's a follow-up question on this, and it's directed to James. And Thang asks, curious to hear from James, what are some programs and incentives that the net zero strategy has considered to better support workers and employers to engage in training? As I said, this just flows in so naturally.
and it's funny because I probably will give the same answer I would have given if you just asked me this question. I don't think we are necessarily looking at those types of incentives at the municipal level. And I was going to say, kind of maybe a typical government response, which is, I think this type of answers really has to be looked at from a broader scale and from higher level orders of government, whether that's the province or the federal government. Right. For municipalities, I think it becomes more challenging to look into very specific programs that get into investing, property tax dollars into training, because again, we are, working in a challenging environment, in terms of what is being needed across the region, across the country, across the province. So, I'd have a hard time probably making a case of investing specific dollars in training programs unless I could guarantee that those training programs were going to result in actions in the city of Toronto and benefits to the citizens of Toronto. I think it is something that really needs to be looked at from a broader scale. Given what is needed in terms of that net zero transition at both the provincial or federal level, it becomes a bit more challenging at a municipal government to wade in there. We can invest in things that result in changes in a building sitting in the city of Toronto, because that building isn't going to get picked up and moved, down the 401. But harder to do some of those investments, I think, at the municipal level that really go down. So I think, that is the challenge you get into when you get into the different levels of government. But I would say, not to pass the buck too much, it really is something that higher order levels of government really need to look at.
Yep. One last question, Daryl. Its question goes to you. And how does the training you offer impact retention at GeoSource, or does it? Do you find that employees tend to stay having received that support to take the skills, or do they simply leave?
That's a great question, and thank you to whomever has put that forward. I think the level of training and the way that we go about upskilling our people and making sure that they see a clean pathway to succession through the company is what helps with our retention. So at the end of the day, a training program can be as good as the next one, but if your culture doesn't support growth and opportunity for succeeding internally, then it doesn't really matter how good your training program is. So I would turn it back to say, it's about developing the right culture inside of the organization that will really impact the retention number, if you will.
Right. Okay, well, I think we're right on time, which is pretty impressive, okay, for a 2-hour event. So I'm just going to wrap it up by thanking again Judy and Jagdish for organizing this. I think this was a tremendous event, and I know there was a lot of people registered on it. Okay, I think there was about 100, 120 people, sort of thing. My understanding is the presentation and some materials will be posted on the website. I think, Judy, will you be sending out kind of a notification to everyone that's registered?
Yes, I'll be doing that. Rob, I'll finish off after you finish speaking and thanking the panelists and so forth. I'll just wrap up with the technical details like that. Tell people.
Good. Okay. And just final note, thank all the, the panelists. Okay, the 4 of you were great. It really complimentary kind of speakers, looking at this from a very different perspective. So, this was very enjoyable and easy to do. Okay, and fun. Okay. And with that, I'm going to switch it over to Judy.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob. I thought that was an excellent panel discussion, and despite technical challenges, you came to the fore. I think we neglected to introduce Rob at the beginning of the session. Rob is the Green Sector Specialist in the Economic Development and Culture Division, working with Jagdish, and certainly put his expertise and moderation skills to use today. I also really want to thank the other speakers and the panelists who've donated their time of your very busy schedules, I know, and your company's time and all that, to us to be able to put on this session for people this afternoon. I really enjoyed it. Personally, this is not a topic that I know a lot about, and perhaps things are always interesting when you don't know much about them because you always learn so much more. But I personally have learned a lot today, and I really thank you for your very insightful conversation. I also want to thank the ICE committee members, all of whom again are volunteers. Jagdish organized the program for us today, spending many hours, and Ronnie Simic helped us set up the feedback questionnaire, and the committee at its various meetings have contributed lots of advice and feedback. So thank you to the ICE committee. On that theme, I do encourage everyone to complete the feedback questionnaire that you'll find on the event page that you're looking at. Just take a couple of minutes and it will really help us for the future. You can watch the webcast again, and you can forward a link to it to others. We have had it recorded, and it will be posted on the committee's website, which links through to a YouTube channel that we have. And we'll also be posting the presentations there and more information about the various speakers. So I will be sending everyone who registered, as well as the speakers and the panelists, a link to that following today's presentation. Probably it'll happen on Monday that I'll send that link. And then you can go there and check out more detail and watch the webcast again, should you feel so inclined. The good thing about webcasts, you can actually fast forward too, so so that's always handy. I also invite anyone to reach out to the committee directly. And again, I'll put this information in the email, but our address is info@icecommittee.org. And if anyone watching has any follow-up questions or further thoughts that they'd like us to communicate to the panel members and speakers, we'll try to facilitate those connections on your behalf. So I think that's about it for me. It's time to bring today's session to a close. So I thank you again all for your time and attention, and I hope that you enjoy the remainder of your day. Thank you so much.